The world is once again dividing in two.
Hello and welcome to GZERO World. Today's show is a little different. Today I'm going to devote my entire program to a conversation I had with a man who says the U.S. is entering a Cold War with China. His take? It's largely because of technology, and if the U.S. is to prevail, it'll be democratic values that help carry it through. I'm talking about Niall Ferguson, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, and he's a really cool guy. But don't worry, I've also made room for your puppet regime.
Welcome back to most powerful call-in show in world, putting it out there.
But first, a word from the folks who help us keep the lights on.
Major corporate funding provided by founding sponsor First Republic. At First Republic, our clients come first. Taking the time to listen helps us provide customized banking and wealth management solutions. More on our clients at firstrepublic.com. Funding also provided by Harold J. Newman and by James and Meryl Tisch.
I don't have to work with the puppets, do I?
Not yet.
No, don't
Eventually.
need to puppets.
I'm gonna superimpose them behind your head.
No,
It's
don't
gonna
do
be awesome.
that. Life is hard enough.
Senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, thinker of very big thoughts, Niall Ferguson. Niall, very happy to be with you.
Very nice to be with you too.
So the State of the Union globally is...
Well, the Union isn't united. I mean, the world is once again dividing in two. The age of chimerica, which is my preferred term. You came up with GZERO.
Not for chimerica, though.
Chimerica is actually the real organizing idea of the period up until, well, maybe 2015, 2016. And I think the end of chimerica is the prelude to some version of a Cold War between the United States and China. And this is interesting because we began with a currency war that was really waged by China against the US. The US retaliated with a trade war. But we're now entering a new phase, which is, I'll call the tech war. And the tech war, which is actually much more interesting than the trade war. The trade war is so 1970s. But the tech war is very 21st century. It's a much more evenly balanced contest. The US clearly wins the trade war. It's very asymmetrical. It hurts China way more than the US. That was easy to see. The tech war is quite finely balanced because the US has a meaningful rival in China when it comes to, say, AI, artificial intelligence. It has a very serious competitor when it comes to international payments. Look at the way in which the Chinese are expanding their payment platforms. Alipay, WePay, internationally. So I think the real theme of our time is...
And the Chinese do use, I mean, they don't use wallets.
The Chinese are ahead of the US in payments nationally, but what's interesting is that their platforms are now being rolled out internationally to other emerging markets. So I would say the big theme of 2019 is it's back to bipolar.
So tech, to the extent that we are seeing that fight, do you see that as inevitably developing states led by, controlled by China versus the United States and the developed world, or does it not have to be that way?
No, it won't be that way at all, actually. There's some important emerging markets breaking for the US right now. Look at Brazil. Jair Bolsonaro overtly campaigned on an anti-Chinese ticket in Brazil last year, paid a visit to Taiwan during the campaign.
So a few emerging markets break for the United States.
Any emerging market that regards China as a threat, say Vietnam, is going to be inclined to lean towards the United States.
Even though economically they'll be dominated by the Chinese?
If there's any possibility of a US-led balancing coalition against the rise of China, you'll take it.
Do you think that there will be developed states that will break for Beijing?
Yeah.
And who are they?
Well, the big question really is, how does Europe play this? And how far does the US confront Europe on, say, automobile tariffs? The European problem is a very interesting one because European leaders have spent a great deal of the last 2.5 years denouncing Donald Trump and complaining that the United States is no longer the leader of the liberal international order, whereas Xi Jinping will show up in Davos and say all the things that Europeans want to hear.
They may despise Trump, but as Churchill would say, China will still be authoritarian in the morning.
Right. And I think from a European point of view, there's a dilemma here.
You didn't even smile at that.
I try not to smile.
Oh, it's just wrong. Is it the beard? Is that what it is?
It's my winter plumage, and it introduces a kind of gravitas that I normally don't have.
Okay.
On the other hand, the Europeans are the ones who've led the way in regulating the US tech companies. So Europe is in this interesting position in a bipolar world. It's kind of stuck in the middle. It doesn't have big tech companies. It doesn't have great defense capability. It's only really important economically, and it has its own entirely consuming internal problems that relate to migration and populism. But I don't think
they really care about privacy. I mean, that's what's driving the regulatory side, which, let's face it, if you ask the Americans and the Chinese, who are the Europeans closer to in terms of where they want to be. Right.
It ought to be straightforward that Europe aligns with the United States.
But you're saying they're not there yet.
Not with the Trump administration in office.
So you're now here in Silicon Valley. How has that immersion changed the way you think?
I always used to come here a few weeks a year as a Hoover Fellow, and that definitely forced me out of an Atlantic mindset and into one that was more Pacific orientated, and it made me aware earlier than I would have been of the massive importance of the network platforms as they arose here, starting with Amazon and then Google and then Facebook. And so moving here full-time just helped to crystallize in my mind the sense that we had a problem. And that was the 2016 problem, that the public sphere in not only the United States, but throughout the Western world is now dominated by a handful of network platforms made in America, but operating globally. And these network platforms have only one overwhelming dominant preoccupation, which is to sell advertising. And if that's their priority, maintaining the health of democracy is probably number 15 on the list of priorities.
How much is it a dilemma in the sense that you've got the massive concerns about democracy not only not being a priority, but being actively subverted, and at the same time, the alternative model, the tech Cold War that is coming, the single threat that you believe is perhaps most significant to that of the sustainability of democracy is not these tech companies from within, but the Chinese model from without. What do you do about that?
Well, we're kind of between the devil and the deep blue sea. It's obvious what a Chinese-dominated world would look like. There would be zero privacy, and the party would have access to everybody's data, and a system of social credit plus surveillance could be developed that would make Aldous Huxley plus George Orwell look like a libertarian paradise. On the other hand, we have an alternative that is not that much more attractive in this alternative world, which is something reminiscent of the science fiction novel Snow Crash.
Like Neil Stevens.
The problem we have is that if we have a company like Facebook with the powers that the Chinese Communist Party wishes to enjoy, the power over individual users, the knowledge of their behaviors, the insight into their data, but they're an entirely private entity dominated by one of the founders' shareholdings, to whom is Mark Zuckerberg accountable? And it's not as big a problem as Xi Jinping having a kind of totalitarian panopticon, but it is a serious problem. And we in the United States have not come up with the solution to that problem yet. But it seems to me that we could do more to increase the liability that they have for the content that appears on their platforms. But we also need to say that here in the United States, they should operate, because they practically are the public sphere. I mean, 80% of Americans are consuming their news via Google or Facebook,
networks,
often through a news feed. We should say, now, you guys are practically the public sphere. This is a point that the Supreme Court has already made. Therefore, you should act as if the First Amendment applies to you. You cannot simply use your terms of service to shut down any hate speech that you don't like. There is a good body of law that goes back about 100 years about what is acceptable free speech under the First Amendment. That should apply in cyberspace. So there are some harms that you should be liable for. We know what those are if they involve incitement to violence against Ian Bremmer, there should be a penalty for content.
But the individuals, for example, that they have routinely shut down, who are for opinions that violate the terms of service, should not have the legal right to do that.
That is far too much power for private companies to enjoy, given the scale of their dominance in the public sphere. In what way is that superior to the Chinese Communist Party having the power to decide what can and cannot appear on the Chinese internet?
So I could turn this conversation to like what corporations should do, and I'm kind of interested in that. But I want to ask you something a little more personal, which is that as someone who believes that the public space is going to become much more toxic, as someone who understands that the distribution networks are truly problematic, and yet as someone who for a living develops content, how does it make you feel about what you do and your role?
Well, nervous, because the public sphere has become so much more hazardous. It's a battle space, which it really wasn't when I was a younger writer. The downside risks of being a public intellectual are massively greater than they used to be. Because when I started out in the 1980s, you had an argument, you would debate with, say, somebody on the other side politically, and you would write a column and they might respond, and there would be a discussion, and then you might go on television and have a conversation like this. All of that has been replaced by the character assassination techniques that are possible on Twitter and with other social media, where you may disagree with somebody's view, but it's much easier just to attack their good faith than to engage with the argument. So the first point I'd make is that the public sphere has become a battle space. And if you are a quote unquote public intellectual, if you are out there making arguments, you should expect a sustained attempt to destroy your reputation, not your argument. That's not what people go for anymore. The threat that is posed to individual freedom is a great one. It's posed not only by the Chinese Communist Party, it's posed from within by the way in which we've allowed our public sphere to be taken over by engines of advertising revenue. So if one simply says, oh, this is too toxic for me, I'm going into my ivory tower where I will concentrate on an arcane work, the key to all mythologies, to be published posthumously, you're running away. The only thing one can do is to fight lies with truth, engage in civility where other people are descending into the gutter, and when one teaches, try to teach the values of the open society. You know, I think we're heading rapidly towards the closed society.
The urgency is less the tech war against the Chinese.
Our fundamental proposition has to be credible. And it isn't credible at the moment to say, our system is far superior to yours. Because anybody who looks at our system at the moment, and particularly at our system in the wake of the 2016 election, is like, really? So we have to make a much more compelling case that we really do have a free society, that we really have free speech, that our public sphere is not dominated by a few profit-seeking corporations. We have to do something about this, and we are a long way from achieving it. If we go into the tech war with this as our offer, a lot of the rest of the world is going to be justly skeptical.
Say no.
If we're heading for a Cold War, it will have very different implications from the US-Soviet Cold War, which occurred between two separate societies. And I think that's going to cause a great deal of tension, anguish. It's going to cause all kinds of conflicts if it gets really ugly for Chinese Americans. So I think we'll look back on this and kind of miss Chimerica if it goes in the direction that I fear.
Niall Ferguson, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian.
And now for something completely different, I've got your puppet regime.
Hi guys, welcome back to most powerful call-in show in world, Putting It Out There, with me, President of Russia. This week we come to you live from Boardwalk in Brighton Beach. They say here is just like Russia in 1980s, and I am here for it. Okay, first question comes from Willis in Georgia. Willis, you are live. Put it out there.
Hello, Vladimir. First time, long time. Thank you so much for taking my call. There is a cat stuck in my tree, Vladimir.
Willis, let me stop you. Are you calling from Georgia, the country?
Well, I don't quite know what you mean by that, Vladimir, but I definitely live in the country. There's not so much as a wide place in the road within 75 miles of my place.
Okay, Hayseed. Okay, look, cat in tree. Is tree within your sphere of influence?
Oh, it's definitely my sphere of influence. It's right there in my backyard. It's my tree.
But is it your cat?
No, it's my neighbor's cat.
Exactly. Willis, listen to me. You must destroy this cat.
Okay, well, Vladimir, I got nothing against the cat. Now, my neighbor I got a little bit of a problem with because he borrowed an oven mitt from me 2 weeks ago. He has not returned it, Vladimir.
Focus on cat. It always starts with cat. First is coming cat, then is coming dogs, then is coming children with frisbee, then it's NATO, it's CIA.
Oh, Lord, I definitely don't want all these people tromping across my lawn. I spent a lot of money on my lawn.
Then you must kill cat.
Listen, it's a sweet little cat, Vladimir. He's just in my sphere of influence.
I know how to deal with this. Let me deal with this.
Breaking news, we're receiving reports that Russian tanks have just crossed the border into...
That's our show this week. And you know what? I mean, if you had a show, you could be doing this instead of me. That'd be, we could change it up. But until that happens, I'll be back next week. You must do this. You must be right here. We'll be chatting. Don't miss it. In the meantime, but if you like what you've seen, get all interactive. Check us out on GZEROmedia.com. Send a note. Tell me what you think. Someone might read it. See you soon.
Major corporate funding provided by founding sponsor First Republic. At First Republic, our clients come first. Taking the time to listen helps us provide customized banking and wealth management solutions. More on our clients at firstrepublic.com. Funding also provided by Harold J. Newman and by James and Merrill Tisch.